Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Real Life Podcast. Today, I thought that it would be a good idea to not just have me speaking by myself, so I've brought in the help of Michael Wyllie. Michael, how are you?
I'm good today. How are you doing, Dom?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Last week, I spoke about football films, which was quite a niche topic, but it was something I enjoyed. And something else I very much enjoy are the films of Christopher Nolan. Probably my favourite director. I know that's a little bit basic, but I think we both share a big interest in the work that he's done and all that kind of stuff. So I thought that we could go through our top 3 Nolan films. So we'll each say our number 3 and then we'll talk about them, and then 2 and then 1. So there's the possibility of 6 films here, although I feel like we may end up agreeing.
I think there might be 1 or 2 in common.
Okay, sure. But I'm going to hit you with a surprise question now.
Oh, go for it.
Of the films that you've seen from Nolan, which is your least favourite?
Ooh. Now this might be a controversial one, but I'm going to say Memento.
Memento.
Because I know that a lot of people do really enjoy Memento, but I thought, even though it's one of his earlier films, it was one of his, probably his first big studio one.
Yeah, sure.
But I think it leans way too heavily into that Nolan tendency to never ever tell a story in one go.
Sure.
It has to be 15 different flashbacks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And 47 different things that happen in different time jumps, and it was too much for me.
Okay, cool. I'm kind of with you because mine's following.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that wasn't massively, big budget or big studio or whatever, but I thought that kind of had the same tendency to not just really be able to tell a story quite linearly.
Yeah.
So, let's not beat around the bush, and I will ask you what your third favourite Nolan film is.
No, I'm not going to judge you at all for picking quite a well-known director, because I've got a very well-known top 3.
Okay.
Because my number 3 Nolan film is The Dark Knight.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, that was very nearly my number 3. So I was almost the same. This order can change on any given day for me, to be honest. It depends on when I've seen them.
I'm very much the same.
But my number 3 is Dunkirk.
Dunkirk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about The Dark Knight first. Talk me through what it is that means you've got it so high ranked up.
Now, I'm going to start with why it's number 3 and not number 1 and 2, because it's a lot of people's 1 and 2.
Okay, yeah.
And that's simply because it's an excellent standalone film, and it has a very self-contained plot. But as a story with the themes it talks about, it's second in a trilogy. So I'll bring up what I've got on The Dark Knight now. The Dark Knight trilogy is a trilogy about Bruce Wayne and Gotham.
Yep.
And the kind of the soul that they share, and the spiritual health of Bruce Wayne and the spiritual health of Gotham. That's what the trilogy talks about. What it does very well is set up this world where Bruce Wayne, as the Batman, taking on this character, has, his whole character motivation is searching to restore kind of the spiritual peace that was established in Batman Begins.
Sure, yeah.
And he has essentially gone too far. He's pushed the underbelly of society to its limit, which leads to the empowerment of the Joker, who is the complete thematic, physical opposite of Batman.
Right.
What I think the film does very well is sets up the third film in that trilogy perfectly, because the story concludes with the establishment of a false peace, a peace built on a lie, because essentially the Joker wins, because he's not striving for any sort of material aim, which is what makes him so opposite to Batman. The Joker wins not because he's able to convince those people on the ferries to blow each other up, and not because he escapes prison. He wins because he corrupts Harvey Dent. The Joker's aim is to prove that everyone is one bad day away from becoming him.
Sure.
And with Harvey Dent, who is the White Knight, he's what Gotham, he's what Gotham should be. He's what Gotham can be. He's the best of them.
Yeah.
He's built up as that. And when the Joker corrupts him, from that point in the film onwards, he's won. He's already won. He literally says it's an ace in the hole. So when Commissioner Gordon and Bruce Wayne manage to construct this lie around the myth of Harvey Dent, that's a false beat. That's a false piece. In effect, they create the time bomb that Bane then detonates.
Okay.
So I just think it sets up the third film in the story perfectly. It's not in my number 1 and 2 simply because to get the thematic conclusion out of The Dark Knight, you need 2 other films.
You need 2 other films. I mean, that's a good point. And I think there is an argument to say actually one of the reasons it works so well is because the ending of Batman Begins sets it up so well in terms of creating the stage for him, and even that little teaser of flicking over the Joker card and that being the sort of the teaser to him being in the next film. And then actually, obviously there's problems because in the third film you can't have Heath Ledger's Joker because Heath was no longer around.
So
But
whatever plans Nolan may have had for that were scuppered.
they had to shift, sure.
Yeah.
But actually, I think in the end, it sort of plays into that. It plays into his hands because if you're using the argument that Bane is essentially extracting what the Joker was trying to do in the first place himself, and is maybe a proof of what the Joker was saying in terms of everyone's one bad day away from becoming himself, that works quite well. And actually, the ending of The Dark Knight Rises moved me more than anything in The Dark Knight because it felt like the perfect ending to that trilogy.
I would agree, and that's because the conclusion to the Dark Knight Rises. Yes, it's the conclusion to what, a 2.5 hour film, something like that. But it's the conclusion to essentially 9 hours of screen time.
Yeah,
because it just manages up. Because the ending of The Dark Knight is when Bruce Wayne neither goes too far nor does he set up the lie. It's when there's finally resolution. It's when he finally returns to that peaceful. Him and the city are finally able to return to that peaceful state that existed, that Thomas and Martha Wayne represented.
Yeah.
You know, I watched a tremendous analysis that was comparing it to Milton's Paradise Lost.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and the Garden of Eden, essentially. Bruce Wayne and Rachel, and then Catwoman representing the divine masculine and feminine.
Oh, okay.
And basically, anytime Batman does something wrong, which leads to the Joker, leads to Bane, he is diverging from that divine masculine.
Sure.
And it's an attempt to return to that state.
Didn't think of it like that, but that is a very good comparison. I think one of the... I have seen people, say that the ending of The Dark Knight Rises is actually ambiguous, and, that some people believe that Batman is dead. I think that's wrong, because everything in that scene is telling you that, the dream that... Alfred, thank you. The dream that Alfred had is coming true. He sees him across the thing, and he takes out his credit card to pay for the tab, and then he puts it away because he knows that Bruce Wayne's going to pick up the tab.
Yeah.
And that feels to me like a perfect ending and isn't as ambiguous as some of the other films we may end up talking about.
Yeah.
The reason why I think The Dark Knight actually for me is such a good film is because of the way it looked. I mean, it had the typical Nolan team of Lee Smith editing and Wally Pfister doing cinematography, which meant that it had this brilliant sort of cinematic language, and it was filled with the set pieces that Nolan does so well and all that kind of stuff. And I think actually it made me hold out more hope for the rest of the kind of superhero movie world, because I thought if this is now the standards to aim for, which is why actually when The Batman that's just come out, when I saw that I was actually quite pleased with it, because I felt it actually didn't just play into the traditional sort of stereotypical superhero things of a lot of, say, Marvel films, for example, tend to be quite basic in terms of actual cinematography. They sort of set up a scene where it's maybe a wide shot or a close-up, and effects are quite easily to be put in, whereas with something like The Dark Knight, particularly something like the interrogation scene with the Joker, I mean, that's a great example of just using cinematography as it is, because the whole scene, the camera's sort of panning round, and then by the end of it, they end up on the same side of the screen, which is basically saying they are the same. Yeah. And that's probably, those kind of, changes are why it ranks so highly for me, I guess. But yeah, no, I very easily could have picked The Dark Knight for number 3. It was a toss up.
I think anyone could have.
Yeah. Well, I went for Dunkirk, which was written, directed, and produced solely by Nolan, so it's obviously his hands are all over it. It's Lee Smith editing again, but this time cinematographer is, and you'll like this, Hoyte van Hoytema.
The Giant Man.
The Giant Man. It's Hans Zimmer as per, and it's got a really brilliant cast. Everyone always remembers the film. This is the film with Harry Styles in. Yeah. And there's a story which supposedly says Nolan didn't actually know who Harry Styles was when he was casting him. Do you believe that?
Not for a second.
No, I don't believe you can go that. I know you can get into the mid 2010s and not know who Harry Styles was.
There's no way. No. Even someone who's so apart from celebrity culture,
you'd still know.
You've got to.
Absolutely. Well, I think the reason why I put it at number 3, and as I say, this can change, but I think it's because I watched it fairly recently. It's sort of still stuck in the mind. Is that it uses, I think, time in the cleverest way out of any of the Nolan films. So time is obviously a big theme across all of them. In Memento, the events are told backwards. In Interstellar, it changes depending on what planet you're on.
In Tenet, it's all at the same time.
Tenet's all at the same time, palindromic thing. It's in Interstellar. In Inception, it depends on which dream layer you're in. Whereas this one is all about which character perspective you're being shown,
which I think speaks to real life the most effectively.
Sure, absolutely, and that's one of the good things about this film is that it feels emotive because it is a story that everyone knows quite well, or that is relatively close to home.
Yeah.
Despite having 3 different time zones and character perspectives, I don't think it ever feels like you're lost. I don't think you ever feel like you're out of sync or out of the loop.
I would say towards the start of the film, when you have the cards coming on screen telling you what timeline you're on.
Okay.
At that point, I was confused because I didn't know at that point what it meant.
Sure. Okay.
But then when you get later on into the film and events start to happen in parallel, for example, the dogfight above the oil spill.
Yeah.
That's when it started to click for me, and I said, okay, this is 3 different timelines converging.
I watched an interview with him where he is questioned about his use of time, and he says that cinema's manipulation over it is a very unique one, in that you can move an audience along without having to wonder too badly how they got there or whatever. You just kind of snap into it.
Yeah.
And this, to me, felt like, with everything kind of converging on this one same point from 3 different time zones, actually felt like the perfect example of that, because I felt like no matter where I was, everything felt like it was crescendoing to the big finish.
Yeah.
And he also mentioned that, this is most of his films have, as normal 3 acts, but the 3rd act is basically made of a massive crescendo.
Yeah.
And this film is basically just the crescendo, and then the final bit, he's wondering if could he take a 3rd act of one of his films and make an entire film out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that works really well in this. It's his shortest script. It was only 76 pages. I think that benefits Nolan because I think he has a problem with exposition.
I would definitely agree.
Yeah.
I think it's one of his... most of his scripts are airtight completely, but the way he does that is in the first half an hour of a film. Yeah. You will have a 5-minute exposition.
Absolutely.
Which is fine because I don't particularly mind that. But I think that kind of gives him the reputation for being not like highbrow, but quite an unapproachable director.
Sure. But I think the benefit of this is that it lets scenes breathe quite a lot, and actually I think it holds the tension a lot more than certain other films where there's moments where, so there is a certain film which I'm not going to mention yet because I feel like we might come onto it.
Yeah.
Where I think a lot of it will be better if there was no dialogue whatsoever. I think Nolan is simultaneously very good and very bad at show don't tell. He likes to get to a show don't tell stage in the latter part of his films, but as you say, the early parts, the early half an hour means that you will have to have a large informational dump.
He'll give you a bullet point presentation at the start of a film.
Exactly, and expect you to run with it. Yeah, sure. Yeah,
these are the rules, and then he'll give you a stellar film.
Yeah,
but he has to explain the rules to you.
Have you seen 1917?
I have seen 1917.
Do you think it is better than 1917?
Dunkirk? No, but they try and do very different things.
This is true. But this is odd because I think 1917 is a really, really good film and actually had it won Best Picture. I don't think I would have been annoyed.
No, not at all.
But I think this is more emotive than that. And I think the reason that is because we are basically taken through the film with a character, Film Whitehead, who is unnamed and intensely regular. He's not... it's not this great maverick character. It's not like we're following his, journey through navigating D-Day as this great hero or anything like that. It's quite the opposite.
He looks practically identical to everyone else on that beach.
Exactly, sure, yeah. No, they all look the same. I think that's why it works so well, is because it sort of, I don't know, it makes us feel like anyone watching in the audience could have been in exactly the same position. And for me, that means that the emotional payoff at the end, when, they're reading the newspaper on the train and they come in and they think everyone's going to hate them because... the blind man gives them the blanket and doesn't look at them, which is slightly on the nose, but I get the sentiment. I think that's why it pays off so well for me, is because every single one of those people could have been the dead man on the beach, or could have been the person in the audience watching, or could have been the person sat at home waiting to get conscripted. So I think that kind of works in terms of piecing it together. Whereas in 1917, as much as I think it's a great cinematic achievement, I wasn't as moved as I would have been because it's odd. I think because we were stuck with the same character for the whole film.
And I think 1917 is it's a very traditional film in terms of what it does, when it does it, and how it presents its character's journey. It's a standard, not quite hero's journey, but it's a standard character journey through several locations and plot points. It tells the traditional war is hell narrative in a very traditional war is hell narrative way.
Sure,
it does
yeah.
it excellently. It does it better than most films in that genre, but it doesn't quite try and... It still does it through the lens of, here is your single character, here is your hero, he has this special task, which I think, while it does it so well, it's something that's been done before.
Sure. I mean, that nightmare sequence in 1917 is... that's a lot. But yes, that is Dunkirk and The Dark Knight. So, on to our number 2s then, and I'd like to hear yours first, please.
So, again, with a very traditional list, I'm going to go for Inception as my number 2.
Inception at number 2?
Yeah, which I think links back to something you mentioned earlier, but we can cover that.
Interesting. Well, my number 2 is The Prestige. So... do you know what? I'm going to spoil this list now because I want to talk about it. My number 1 is Inception, and I think if you know me, you probably know that was
I
going to
could
happen.
have seen this coming. Yeah.
So let's talk about Inception. Tell me why it's number 2 on your list.
So, Inception, I think, is it's a massive budget, it's a massive cast, it's a massive production value, but weirdly, I think it's the most personal of Nolan's films, and that's because all you need to do to appreciate this side of Inception anyway, because it's a good film, there's multiple ways to look at it, is I would look at it as like a almost a biography for Nolan himself. Each theme of the story links back in some way to his experience as a filmmaker and as a father as well, which shows up in a lot of different Nolan films. It shows up in The Prestige, it shows up in Interstellar, just to name 2. Essentially what you have is a father consumed by work, being unable to see his children and unable to explain why he cannot see them in terms that they will understand, because in Inception he's physically separated and hounded by police and kind of anonymous thugs, and then in real life Nolan is separated from his children by work and the tremendous pressure he feels to deliver on these big budget films.
Sure.
Each member of that team represents a key, this is very well known, each member of the team in Inception represents a key part of a filmmaking process. So you have Saito, the studio, Cobb, the director, Tom Hardy's character is the actor.
I love Tom Hardy's character.
Ariadne, the architect, that is a set designer, costume designer, and Cobb's right-hand man.
I'm not going to be the one for names, but do you mean Joseph Gordon-Levitt?
I do mean Joseph Gordon-Levitt's
him.
character, thank you. He's a producer almost. And it's just, the story is a filmmaking process, and then you have Cillian Murphy's character Fisher. He is the audience.
Yep.
They are delivering this production to him, just as Nolan and his compatriots are delivering this production to us, the audience. And the story does for Fisher what Nolan is aiming the story will do, in my head at least, for him and his children. Because at the end of the story, you have Cobb physically reuniting with his children. They turn around, and for the first time in the film, you and Cobb can see their faces. Which is one of the reasons I believe the ending is real. But
I'm with you there, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, and it spiritually repairs the relationship between Fisher and his father, if not in real terms. Because I didn't notice until my second watching, but Fisher's father passes away weeks before the start of the film. Now, what I think Christopher Nolan's trying to do here, and he does it as well in The Prestige, and he does it a lot heavier in Interstellar, is he's delivering these movies, yes, to us as the audience in a way that's mass applicable, which is why there's not many, very specific hints, but they're love letters to his kids to explain why their dad is never around and why their dad can't be with them when they're growing up.
Sure.
And because just like Cobb's kids, they're too young to understand.
Yep.
So I think Inception, in terms of story and theme, that's why it's one of my favorite Nolan films, and indeed it's I would say interchangeable with my number 1. And then you have just the honest top tier, almost impeccable production value that got put into that film. Hans Zimmer's score is incredible. It gave us the foghorn trailer effect to which Hollywood owes so much. And you have the use of time to demonstrate different story beats on each level of the dream, and it's really a tremendous achievement.
I absolutely agree with everything you've just said, and actually that's a way that I hadn't thought of yet in terms of being... I obviously thought about it as being a representation of cinema and the power of cinema, but I hadn't seen it as Fisher being the audience as I hadn't got yet. I hadn't put together in my head that there was a production within the film being put on for someone within the film as well as us. I thought it was all sort of more of a commentary on the ability of cinema itself, but actually that's a very...
It's a film and a dream and a film and a dream and a film.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's great. I'm going to ask you a question now, and this I think is the genius of the film. What are they trying to do in the film? What are Cobb and his gang trying to do in the film? What are they trying to accomplish?
Well, they're trying to make Fisher think of something on his own.
There you go. They're trying to make Fisher change his mind. And imagine being Christopher Nolan, going to Warner Brothers and going, I've got a film. It's about people trying to make someone change their mind. Can I have $200 million? And they go, sorry, I'm going to need a little bit more than that. But because, you know...
because it's Christopher Nolan.
Exactly.
He would say no.
He
would say, no, that's all I'm giving you.
He said, I'm not coming back with anything more than this. But they let him do it. And it's very, very good that they let him do it. And the main thing I take away from Inception, actually, is something Mark Kermode notes, is it proves that you don't have to dumb down blockbusters in the name of hoping the audience get it. Yeah. Because this was incredibly well received and most of the audience got it. I mean, not all of the audience. I'm probably going to out my mother here, but she wasn't immensely switched on while we were watching the film. But I think, as you say, everything is practically perfect about it. I mean, this is why it is my number one. It looks incredible. The mirror's moving, the city falling in on itself. The hallway sequence, which I don't get. I don't know how they did it. I've watched the behind the scenes. I don't know how Joseph Gordon-Levitt just floated down a corridor while it rotated around him. I don't understand it. But yeah, I think the genius of it is that the plot is very, very simple. They're trying to do corporate espionage by making Cillian Murphy change his mind. And then Cobb can lose his criminal status and see his children. And in doing that, you know, he goes on this whole massive adventure, delving into dreams and
don't forget Tom Hardy gets to get very rich out of it.
So he does. This is also true.
This is also just as good a character motivation as seeing your kids, I'm sure.
There's a sequence in it which I think relates very heavily to what you're saying about the cinema aspect of it. And it's when Ariadne, Elliot Page's character, is first chucked into the dream world, first, you know, put under the machine. And Cobb walks around the streets of Paris and says, you know, he keeps asking questions like, how do you think we got here? Yeah. And then she just kind of, you know, she doesn't vocalise it, but she basically goes, I didn't even think about it, but
the camera cut.
Exactly.
Exactly. Which is what you said earlier.
Which is precisely what Nolan's trying to do with the audience. You know, it's basically, you know, Ariadne becomes the audience in this thing the same way that it happened in...
Leonardo DiCaprio could look at the camera and wink at that point.
Yeah, he absolutely could. Like Austin Powers going, are you getting it, baby? I think Leo's actually brilliant in this, and I think it's a very good addition to have someone with, you know, the big star status of Leo DiCaprio.
Well, this is what Nolan does, is he has the same core cast, and then for whatever leading man he has, he'll bring in someone new, so it doesn't feel too recycled. You know, he does it with Matthew McConaughey as well. He does it with Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman in The Prestige.
Yep. I think there's also a very, very good performance by Marion Cotillard. She's brilliantly evil. She's unsuspectingly evil at the beginning and then fantastically evil at the end. I've got a problem with Inception, which has nothing to do with Inception, which is the Oscars. I mean, it's kind of just proving... I mean, I don't really like the Oscars because they always get it wrong, and this is the number one case. So, in 2011, I think the awards were, they gave Best Director, who I mentioned last episode is the director of Damn United. He won Best Director for The King's Speech in a year that The Social Network and Inception were released. That tells you everything you need to know about the Oscars, and it really, really annoys me that David Fincher and Christopher Nolan were both completely snubbed, because that's just ridiculous. The whole intertwined sequence again, which he does so well with, you know, the different layers of the dreams, and then...
It's the classic 3 set piece cut between third act. You know, he's done that so many times,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to say it gets me every time, every single time.
It's been compared to Luis Buñuel, who was a Spanish director who worked a lot in his films. He was a surrealist. He worked a lot in his films with dreams, which is why they kind of compared him to him.
Yeah,
It wasn't always positive, but what a lot of people said was that Buñuel tended to be subtle in what he was showing you in terms of you just be taken along with it, whereas because of how immensely complicated Nolan would make things, he had to give you what, like we were saying, an expositional dump at the start and have it had to explain to you. So you have to do a lot of work.
The whole sequence with Elliot Page's character, Ariadne, and Leonardo DiCaprio, the first time she dreams.
Yeah.
Well, why do you think we got brought along for that?
Exactly.
So that
exactly.
Leonardo DiCaprio can explain to her and to us how dreaming works in this world.
But I also think that criticism completely misses the idea of context, because if you're working with a £200 million budget, then obviously loads and loads and loads of people who aren't particularly interested in surrealism from the Spanish directors of the 1960s, they're going to be along for the ride, aren't they?
I will say it's a fairly small target market.
Yes.
I think a film where he maybe missed that beat and tried to maybe tone down exposition was perhaps the film he needed it most.
Sure.
Which is Tenet.
Yeah, absolutely.
For quite a few times in that movie, characters essentially say to each other, just go with it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of all the audience is given. And I think that's one of the main weaknesses of that film. That's why it's not in my top 5.
That's perfectly valid. And actually the reason it's not anywhere near my top is because the sound mixing of it is awful.
Oh, God.
It's just music all the time. And you can't hear what anyone's saying. Anyway, let's talk about the ending then. So the spinning top, real or fake? You think it's real?
I think it's real. I think it's definitely real.
I'd love to think it's real. And actually, I probably on balance do. But I actually think, overwhelmingly, I don't think it matters. Because what the film is telling you about that point...
Of the film.
Exactly. What it's telling you about that point is he's found peace with himself. He wasn't responsible for his wife's death. He can move on. It doesn't matter. But actually, I don't know if you've noticed, I don't know how recently you've watched it, but there's a tiny little jolt.
There's a wobble.
Yeah.
There's a wobble
Is that special effects? Or did they have a bloke spinning the top, waiting for it to get it exactly right with a little wobble?
What I want to know is how many takes they
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter by that point. And that's the genius of this, because it's like we just sat through the best part of 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually matter, because what we've been shown is good enough.
I think at that point Nolan would come on screen and wink at you rather than Leo. But no, I agree with you that it's
Did you get what I was trying to say? Did you?
But no, I do agree that within the context of the film and everything the film's throwing at you, it doesn't matter whether it's real or not. What matters is that Cobb, undoubtedly the main character of the film, has got that resolution. Yeah.
And actually, I think Time is Hans Zimmer's magnum opus, that very famous wah that's become so used in everything else. That's just an amazing bit of music. Let's talk about The Prestige, because I had this at number 2. I mean, I'm quite happy to talk about Inception for any length of time.
I was so torn between The Prestige and The Dark Knight, so I'm quite interested to hear what you have to say.
So, the reason why I think this is so good is because, in terms of story, actual story, nothing but story, this is the best he's ever done. I don't think anything has topped this, which is a little bit generous because it's based on a book. Mm-hmm. And it's based on the book by... Christopher Priest. There we go. Christopher Priest is the man who wrote the book. But yeah, it's penned by Jonathan and Christopher Nolan, which I think, when they work together properly, play off very, very well. Definitely in the writing process. Great cast: Hugh Jackman, Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Scarlett Johansson, Rebecca Hall, Andy Serkis, David Bowie. Yeah, I mean, you get that holy shit David Bowie moment. Exactly.
Which is exactly the noise I made at the TV when I watched it the first time.
Didn't expect to see you here, David. But yeah, again, Wally Pfister's on cinematography and Lee Smith on editing. It's the classic team. It looks great. Yeah. It leads you along with everything the whole way through, and it lends itself so brilliantly to rewatches. That's why I love The Prestige, is because all the details and the little lines mean different things on watch 1 compared to watch 2. Yeah. So the most obvious example for me is the stuff with Fallon when Borden's in his disguise. Of course. And Borden's talking to him. And also the "you don't love me today" lines, but you do on some days. I think it's so clever how, when you watch that the first time around, those kind of lines have completely different meaning to the rest of it, and then you watch it again and you feel sort of a pain of you just want them to let let go and let loose. But
you just want him to crack.
Exactly, but he
and
can't
let
because
this poor woman know.
Exactly, this poor woman who actually, that is my main gripe with the film, is that none of the women have any agency in it at all. They're all about loving a man.
Yeah.
And I don't think she had to die.
No, I would agree with you there. I think, you know, an angry storm out. The point is that he loses her. That she doesn't need to die.
Sure. But I guess I suppose the point of it is that he's got to be so committed to this act and this trick.
Ever upward in the stakes.
He can't let anyone know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It tells you at the beginning of the film exactly what is going to happen and then does it perfectly and you don't see the twist coming. That's why I love this film. The first shot of this film is hundreds and hundreds of the cloned hats. And you still don't even realise,
yes.
but you know.
Yes. That was something I only noticed on a rewatch.
Sure, yeah.
You know.
But it's because at the start of the film, when you watch it the first time, that means nothing.
Yeah.
You come back to it and then go, oh, we were actually just being teased the whole time. Like it was there in hat and white.
What year was The Prestige?
The Prestige was released in 2006.
2006. So this Memento would be one of the ones that put Nolan on most people's maps.
Yeah, it was close. I think it was after Batman Begins he released Prestige.
Well,
I think
I'm wrong then, because he's definitely on the map by then.
I think he was. He was on the map by then, but also that's how he gets the likes of Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale and Michael Caine to star in it.
Many of which have stuck around.
Absolutely. I mean, Michael Caine is in everything. I didn't actually realise Michael Caine...
Dunkirk.
No, he's in Dunkirk.
Is he in Dunkirk?
He's the one on the radio talking to Tom Hardy.
Oh, you bastard.
I know. I know. I was like... I was watching the credits and it went Michael Caine. I was like, you what? Michael Caine? I had to Google it and it was like, yeah, he's in Dunkirk.
Oh,
he's on the radio.
I hate and love that. Let's keep moving or I'll get angry.
My favourite thing about The Prestige in terms of the plot is that there's a subplot of Tesla Edison, which is echoing the events of the film. Perfect. Yeah, exactly.
Between Borden and
Ange.
And Ange, that was it. So I've not seen it. It's one of the ones I haven't seen recently. I apologise.
It's fine. The Great Downton. In obviously the period in which it's set, Edison and Tesla were essentially real life magicians.
Of course, yeah.
Seen that way. And, they were facing off. They were saying, testing who can pull off the greatest trick, who can pull off the greatest...
the greatest invention.
Exactly.
I mean, it was a race, but the finish line was moving towards them.
Sure.
And it was who's going to be on top, who's going to be defining the next 1,000 years of technological progress. And I think Edison definitely won out.
Yeah. In terms of name, I think.
In terms of name and legacy. Although I think it was a great tragedy of Nikola Tesla's life is that he was by far the better of the two.
Yeah. And
they just, again, that echoes what's going on in The Prestige.
Yeah. And actually, the fact that in The Prestige, the bit where Tesla's hut up in the mountains is burned down is another link to, Edison was more than happy to sabotage Tesla's work in the same way that there's this ongoing attempt to sabotage the work between the two magicians.
Where I'd say it diverges is that in between the two magicians, they are equally depraved.
Yes, this is true, yeah, sure.
There is no real protagonist to the film because each one is driven equally by the actions of the other.
Yeah.
And that's something where it diverges, I think, from the rivalry between Tesla and Edison. Again, you do get in The Prestige those three classic even Nolan. How you know it's a Nolan story?
Yeah.
There's a reunion between father and daughter.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
There is, I'm going to label it timey-wimey stuff in the Doctor Who tradition.
Yeah.
And I had something else, but I pray I'll get back to it. But let's focus on those two for now.
Focus on those two for now.
Where it's someone consumed by passion, by work, by whatever. Oh, that's the third thing. Someone, because they are delivering things to an audience.
Okay, yes, that's
someone consumed
yes.
by the need to give an audience something they've never had before.
Yeah.
Who is, through their mistakes and their overcommitments, separated from their child. And then by the end of the story, there is resolution and there is reunion, and that's how you know it's a goddamn Nolan script.
Actually, I think why I like the script so much is because with the Notebook reading, there's danger that it does become classic 2 expositional Nolan.
But I think the twist saves that.
The twist does save that perfectly, and the fact that it's a double twist saves it perfectly. The fact that both knew what they were doing to each other but they didn't realize they were having it done to them themselves. Was
Neither of them did.
perfect. Neither of them. It was great. And actually, I think it stuck with me a lot the first time I watched it, because when you realize what has to happen for Danton's trick to actually work, for the final trick to exist
and work every time.
Exactly. When you realize what has to happen, it's really scary. I mean, the great use, again, slightly on the nose, but he uses blind operators in the final show that he's going. They never see any of it. But the fact that he himself, yes, a version of him is reborn every night that has the same memories, the same experiences as him, but fundamentally, it's not him. He has to die every single night. Yeah. Just for this trick.
And every time he comes out of that machine, and every time he looks at one more body in those glass cases that used to be him,
yeah,
that he shares memories with.
Yeah.
Every single time he comes out of there, he thinks, I'm fine with doing this tomorrow. The final shot of The Prestige, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a lineup of the glass cases where all the Dantons are held. And it's kind of it's a weird bit of horror. It's a weird bit of horror right in the end of that film, which I wasn't seeing coming, but
although it's slightly ruined for me the end of that film, because that's such a great, powerful moment, and then there's like a pop song about half a second later when the credits start. I'm like, what's going on? But yes, those were both our number 2, Inception and The Prestige, but it was also my number 1, so theoretically we only have one film to go. Right, okay, so we've spoken about my number 1 and my number 2 and your number 2 as well. What we haven't spoken about is what your number 1 is. Now, I have a very bad feeling we're going to disagree on this.
I think we will. And you're going to hate me for this, because I've ranked it number 1 purely on the emotional punch that it gave me personally.
Okay, which by the way, relevant to all films, is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
But I just hate that you're going to hate that it's this one. And we've covered 5 quite beefy films so far.
Yeah, sure.
So something light, something airy. Interstellar.
Yep. I knew this would happen. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to let you, before I have various bits of moans at you, I want you to tell me and try and convince me why you actually think it's the best Nolan film.
Well, exactly what I said is the emotional punch that it gave me was the biggest of all the Nolan films. I am not going to sit here and claim that Interstellar is a perfect movie.
Okay.
That goes to Inception, by far.
Okay.
In fact, you asked me for my top 3. This is my number 1.
Fine, yeah.
I think if I was to try and do an objective top 3, Inception would be a place above, and the other 2 I would think about a lot harder.
Okay, cool.
But in terms of my favourite Nolan film, it's definitely Interstellar. I just think the visuals that it gives you, the world that it presents to you, he's world building in the way that you would do for a fictional universe, the way that Denis Villeneuve did for Dune. But he's not world building a fictional universe. The laws that he has to explain to you about how this universe works are the laws about how our one works. It's very, Kip Thorne, I can't remember, he won some kind of award for the papers that he published, because the studio gave him the money to computer model.
Yeah, I think I did it as well with Linda Obst, I think, with this film as well. But
and it's just an incredible. It's not many times that you get to say that this film is a scientific achievement. It presents to you this bleak world with vague catastrophe in the past. It's never explained to you, and it doesn't need to be. There is vague previous catastrophes. There's famine is mentioned, dysfunctional military drones are mentioned. There's no Marines anymore. This world that people live in, where it's dying, Earth is dying, and you have these grand stakes. It's the fate of the human race. It's incredible, and yet the moment in the film that actually made me cry the first time I watched it, I won't lie to you, was he walks in to the hospital at the end on Sugar Station. So why is that the most impactful moment of the film? Why does he not give you a 15-minute montage of people flying off Earth and building starships?
Sure.
Because that's not what the film's about.
Yeah, sure.
There is a theme with my top picks today. There is definitely a theme. He does try to break the mold with this film with Anne Hathaway's character, and that's something I think that was very unpopular. And I would agree, it's probably the weakest part of the film, is that little monologue that Anne Hathaway has
on the same page
about how love transcends physical boundaries, because the point that he's making is valid, but he just made it in the most incomprehensible way possible. He just kind of wanted to assert to the audience that love trumps all. It's like, that's something we've all heard before and we all instinctively think is bull.
Yeah.
Especially in a film with this kind of set design and
this kind of the scale,
and it's just sort of it's a weird shoehorn, I would say. I think another part of this film that I liked was the I noticed this on the third rewatch when I'd just done my English dissertation, but there is a lot of allusions to Joseph Campbell's Heart of Darkness.
Okay.
So first of all, I mean, it's said by, I can't remember the actor's name. He's a good actor. I like him. The astronaut with the beard. He played Seneca Crane in The Hunger Games.
I know exactly who you're talking about, but again, it's not coming to my head.
Oh, well. But he calls Gargantua the Black Pole a literal Heart of Darkness.
Right.
And that was the first one. I had the moment where I click at the TV screen and I go, okay, you're doing this. You have Dr. Mann's character, who is a parallel to Kurz from the novel. For anyone listening who hasn't read the novel, I won't blame you, but it's a character journeys up the Congo River to find, this is in colonial Africa, he goes to find a man on a colonial mission. Sure. Who is supposedly the best out of all of them. He was the greatest, he was a great orator, he had passions, he wanted to bring civilization to Africa, and he was supposedly the white knight of this colonizing mission. Who knew there could be that? But and Marlowe, the character, goes and finds him finally after a massive journey through hell where there's just incomprehensible mismanagement and brutality by the colonial elite and by the natives as well. It's just kind of this realm of chaos that they go into, and they find Colonel Kurz, and he's gone insane. Sure. He has lost his mind. He's become barbarous. He's become cruel and all these things. And Dr. Mann's character is a perfect mirror of that. There's not quite the savagery inherent to him, but Dr. Mann's character is what happens when dreams and ambitions meet the real world. And he was just unlucky. He got the wrong world. It was something he never even considered could happen, that it could be him that wasn't on the right world. Okay. And the minute that one thing he hadn't considered presented itself, all of his notions about how the world worked collapsed. Okay. And he pressed the button. Okay. It's just a nice little kind of late second, early third act insertion of a Heart of Darkness narrative, and I enjoyed it. Sure. Yeah. But let's not shy away from the fact that by far and away the two main characters in this film are Matthew McConaughey's character and Jessica Chastain's character. Yes, of course. Cooper and Murph. Now they have kind of you have this thing that shows up in my favorite Nolan films, because again, it's something he does that's very effective, and so he's going to keep doing it. Sure. A father has to leave his children on a mission they cannot understand at the time, and every moment after that, where Murph and Timothée Chalamet and then Casey Affleck's character, every moment that they are then left on Earth is an effective test of faith. Right. And we see that one by one they lose faith. Yep. You just have this. It's a test of faith that Casey Affleck's character fails. He kind of stubbornly stays on the family farm and just kind of resigns himself to that life. Murph attempts to rebel, where Michael Caine's character then fails her again, and that's when she gets the message from her father. The message that's been in the watch the whole time. Because the whole time this is happening on Earth, Cooper has had an extra, I think, 50 years to work with in space. Right. Because he's orbiting this black hole, and that's where the time streams diverge. Because what Cooper can do in 30 seconds, we would have to do in a day. Yes, sure. And it just, I won't deny that although it's a scientific achievement, the film completely breaks the laws of physics in the third act. Yeah. But that is explained away by the fact that the aliens who kick off this story are multidimensional humans. Yeah, sure. Our far future, they're 30 meters away. They don't operate with the same rules as us. And it's just the fact that this is the one redeeming thing of Anne Hathaway's ramble. Okay. Because she's saying that love can transcend physics, love can transcend time, love can transcend whatever law. And you have this sort of the nod that those fifth dimensional beings, I think they're referred to as bulk beings. Right. They use the love between Cooper and his daughter as their way in, because they can't they can't just give us the equation that would save humanity. They have to get in through someone, because even though they're beyond us, they can't go back to our level. They don't know how to communicate with someone in 3 dimensions. Right. Which is why they need Cooper, it's why they need Murph. So them giving Cooper the tools to interact with Murph is their way in. Right. And it manages that in terms of what happens in the movie, the plot, the screenplay or whatever. Yeah. That's, I think, its main strengths. Now, that was a bit more rambly than my stuff on the other two, and I think that kind of will tell you everything you need to know about why it's not maybe the objective best pick.
Sure, yeah.
It's not airtight.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of problems with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's by no means a bad movie. I think people hold Nolan to very high standards,
Yes,
as they should.
yeah, they do, yeah.
But you know, that's what I like about the screenplay. And then production value, you have everything the same. I could say the same things I said about Inception.
Everything's incredible. Yeah, everything is amazing. This is kind of why it frustrates me, this film, because there are bits of it that are really, really, really good. Like the water planet, the Miller's planet, is
that's
amazing.
A perfect sequence.
It's incredible. It's such a brilliant moment, and it really sticks with you. I'm glad you mentioned that, you know, you can see there's objective issues with it, because I find myself sort of struggling to like overlook them. So
Yeah.
Jack Howard did a bit about this, which is probably more eloquent than I'll be able to. But essentially, it's a bit of a Frankenstein, this film, because it was put together by these two theoretical physicists with Jonathan Nolan writing. And then it was written with Steven Spielberg's direction in mind. He was originally going to be the one to direct the project. And actually, when Nolan took over, I wondered if the dialogue nature, like, you know, the verbal elements of this film would have been better in the hands of Spielberg. I wonder if that would have fitted more in terms of the line of the story. But I understand that, again, it's an echo of Nolan and his daughters and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
I heard this. I heard this comparison before. Christopher Nolan writes dialogue like you're talking to your friends in the office.
Okay.
And then a director like Spielberg, you know, it's like you're talking with your mates at a bar.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the comparison of how their dialogue works. Mm-hmm. And then Quentin Tarantino was you're talking with your mates while they have a gun aimed at you at your balls under the table.
I think there are... this is probably the worst film in terms of exposition for me. Explaining things after the mission has started, once they're on the ship, is stupid. Most of the things Anne Hathaway says are stupid. You know, and the story beats as well, I found slightly predictable. When, at the beginning, there's a mention of, I think there's a ghost in my room.
Yeah.
In my head, I went, this film's dealing with time travel. That's probably going to be Matthew McConaughey. So it was slightly altered when that turned out to be the truth. And my main problem with the whole film is, I'm glad you said it was one of your favourite scenes, because it's probably mine as well, until the end, when Matthew McConaughey gets the chance to go and see his daughter in the hospital bed. Mm-hmm. And it's the film betrays itself, because it's like, thank God they've been reunited, all this work, and now he's finally with her again.
Yeah.
And then he just leaves, and he goes, Tara, I'm glad we caught up. Anyway, I'm off. I was like, no. We just spent 2.5 hours, so this can happen. Let's not just leave again. Let's not just go.
She goes, oh yeah, remember Anne Hathaway, the woman who gave you terrible advice the whole goddamn film. Yeah, you need to go and find her, bro. She's
I know, it did slightly annoy me, but I also think that there are some great moments, like obviously the water planet and
the docking sequence.
The docking sequence is brilliant.
The score.
I'm glad you've mentioned that Dr. Mann is a very subtle nod to Heart of Darkness, because up until learning that, I had a bit of an issue with it, because Dr. Mann felt on the nose. Mm-hmm. But now that there's a little bit more subtext to it that I didn't understand, I think that's slightly less.
Well, I thought it was a nod to Apocalypse Now, and then I read Heart of Darkness,
right.
and then I got why.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sure. As I said before when we were talking about Dunkirk, I think there's a lot of this film that could be played out a little bit better if it didn't have dialogue, and if it was more of a showy film. Because it is a very showy film, it's probably the most showy film, and yet it could be less speaky, if that makes sense. But I still think it's a great film. I'd watch it again.
There's some moments where dialogue's a bit muffled.
Yeah,
I'll say that. Nowhere near as bad as a certain film later on, but
yes. Yeah.
But there's a couple things it's not perfect. Mm-hmm. I love it though.
Sure.
It's definitely my favorite Nolan film.
Okay.
Is it the best? No, but we've agreed on too much on this episode, so.
Well, I'm happy that you think so. Actually, what you've said has changed a fair bit of it to me, because I hadn't really placed the Nolan in the film again with the daughters and the letters to his children and that kind of thing. That sequence where Matthew McConaughey watches his children grow up over 23 years.
How did we not mention that?
Just,
oh my god.
Not a dry eye in the house. It's so
It's
sad.
the fact that the camera could easily be like, Here's the thing. Would it be better if it was a Spielberg direct? Maybe. Would Spielberg have cut between his face and the screen the whole time?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whereas
yeah,
Nolan
sure.
just slowly zooms into McConaughey and he forces you to feel every single second of it.
Yeah.
I mean, outstanding from McConaughey in that scene.
Yeah, it's great. It's a really good performance from Matthew McConaughey. And
Yeah.
actually, that's another example where I think when people say Nolan can't do emotion very well, I point them to that scene and go, you know, here it is.
Here it is. I mean...
But yeah, I think that is pretty much everything I wanted to say about these films, and I think if we could just do a recap of your top three.
Okay.
So at number 3 you had...
I had The Dark Knight.
At number 3 I had Dunkirk. At number 2...
I had Inception.
You had Inception. At number 2 I had The Prestige, and your number 1...
Facing off at number 1 was Interstellar.
And I had Inception.
There we go.
Altogether, I think... What we've kind of found out over the course of this discussion is that actually, objectively speaking, we relatively agree on most of these, and that Inception is definitely
the best.
Yes,
like,
of course.
Is it my It's my favourite. No, but
I'm glad though that there is a distinction between what you think is the best and what is actually your favourite. I'm glad that there's a change there.
There's a big gap in films that are objectively good and films that I like.
Sure.
You know, like. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of films that I love that happen to be
completely.
both.
Yeah.
But there's a big discrepancy.
No, I'm the same. I recently rewatched The Amazing Spider-Man, and like it's not very good, but I love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it.
Just Andrew Garfield manages to carry an entire train wreck of a production just off of charisma.
Exactly.
Like,
it's great.
I just when will Sony just fully contract out their characters? God damn.
That'll be
Stop
the day.
trying to make the films yourself.
Chance will be a fine thing. I will talk about Morbius on this podcast at some point, so get ready for that because you're going to need to turn your volume down. Thank you very much for joining me, Michael. I've very much enjoyed this.
You should have a little beep like Tars for when you're going to make a scream at Morbius. But no, it's been great. I love talking about all things Nolan. So
good stuff.
Been a pleasure.
Well, next week. Not quite sure what the episode will be yet, but I would imagine it'll be a slightly shorter discussion than this, but hopefully you've enjoyed the length we've gone to. I mean, I think for Nolan you kind of need to go into length.
And you had double the opinions to cram in.
So. This is true, but they were very, very welcome opinions, and I will see you all in next week's episode. Bye!